First, let's just kind of make sure we're all in the right place here. Darren and I are going to be talking about enabling secure code at scale in the enterprise, and it's a lot about the process and approach that we follow. We're going to get a little bit technical, but a lot of this is really around some of the secure coding challenges that we see in a large enterprise with a diverse population of developers, and some of the techniques that we're using to make life easier. We're going to get a little bit into some of the, just barely scratching the surface on some Spring Security, so should be a little bit of everything to keep people interested, so let's get going here. So first off, who are we? My name is Matt Rule, and I work for Liberty Mutual on our Secure DevOps Platforms team. So I focus mainly on enablement, right? Platform enablement and putting the processes in place to help developers like Darren deliver applications to production. So my focus tends to be around developer experience and making life easier for developers. Most recently, I've gotten a little bit more into security, and I have a bit of a passion for trying to make that part of our jobs easier. It tends to be one of the most difficult things in getting code into production. So I've made it my personal mission to try to combine that role of security architect with developer advocate, which I think is a unique but much needed role in a modern company.
Yep, I'm Darren. I'm an application developer. Security is not in my job title or anywhere near my job description. I stumbled into this world of security, Spring Security, OAuth, about 2 years ago. We were using one of our internal libraries, and a couple of configuration properties were very, very poorly named, and it got me in a day that it upset me. So I forked the code base, went straight in, and then that's how I got working with Rule, making security easy for everyone within Liberty Mutual.
All right, so you heard the part where we both work for Liberty Mutual. Let me tell you really quickly about where we're coming from here, just to give you a little bit of a backdrop. So it's a pretty big insurance company, 50,000 plus employees spread around the globe, around 5,000 in technology alone. A good majority of those are going to be developers. So we've got a lot of interesting challenges that come out of working in that environment. Big company, lots of developers, a lot of traditional processes and legacy systems to contend with. And we, like a lot of other people, are going through a little bit of our own IT transformation of sorts and trying to take us into a better place where we can be more agile from a business perspective and modernize our applications and our adoption of public cloud. So let's talk for a second about the mindset of the modern developer, because it's important to understand where we're coming from here. The modern developer is a complex creature. They are knowledgeable of many languages these days, and they like to solve difficult problems, but they definitely like to do it the easy way. They like to only have to focus on things that are directly contributing to solving the problem at hand, right? So they're no longer just a coder. They're focused on quality, security, a lot of other aspects of delivering software. We really put a lot of demands on that developer in the modern enterprise, and they're pressured to do this at speed, right? Not just taking their time securing the application like we did back in the old days, but now we expect it to be done quickly and get to production and turn around business value on a daily basis. Not only that, but you got to stay current with the incredible pace of change that we are surrounded by these days. Take that one developer and multiply them by 1,000 or 5,000, right? And look at what that looks like in an enterprise like ours. That's what we have. We're surrounded by hundreds to thousands of apps. We're developing new apps daily. All of these developers have mixed backgrounds, different perspectives, different skill sets that they bring to the table. And so at the same time, as they build out all these applications, there's a lot of cross-cutting concerns. If you look at what they're building, we're going to find things that are being done the same or differently, solving the same problem in different ways all across the enterprise, and there's ways that we can optimize that. So, in the new world, we need to change some of our outdated processes, right? Some of these archaic security processes around doing security reviews, security ops teams that do the security for you. Change a lot of these old processes and move more towards developer empowerment, enabling developers to take on all of these aspects of delivering software, right? So we want speed and security. It's no longer a choice. So let's look at some of the roles that make up our enterprise as we try to change this mindset and empower developers to do more of the security. We've got cybersecurity. There's still a need for those teams. They set the guardrails, deal with a lot of the compliance and security regulations that we need to follow, and you know, look at intrusion detection, vulnerability monitoring, all that kind of stuff that any enterprise needs. We got ops. We got ops that's really more, that should be called ops enablement here, right? We're trying to move away from ops and more towards teams that enable the delivery teams to actually do the work, right? We're standing up platforms and doing the automation, developing self-service tools, everything that we can put in place to let developers do the work. We've got architects who are dealing with making sure that we are following, you know, secure architectures, adhering to the guardrails, and then the developer does everything else. It's just the code, it's the easy part, right? We still need people to break down some of these silos though, right? We got the likes of Darren, who's a security expert and also a developer, also a little bit of a unicorn in a company like ours, right? So how do we scale that? How do we take our security expertise and allow them to do some of this cross-functional collaboration to help developers solve these security problems at the time when they need it, meet them where they're at, and help them solve the problems when they need it done. All right, so we need more unicorns. So like I said, it's just the code. The code is the easy part, right? There can't be that much to know. But what we find when we actually get out there and start building applications, there's a million different things that developers need to know, from OAuth and OIDC to JWTs and different types of tokens and token-based auth, cores, CSRF. There's a lot of different things that a typical developer just needs to understand, and what we find is that we're gapped there, right? That's where we find a lot of those gaps. Spring Security helps to solve a lot of this stuff, right? But there's still a lot of knowledge that you need to retain on a daily basis to be able to deliver secure software. Not only that, but you've got a lot of acronyms. You've got each of our companies have different terms that we use for these things, not just following industry standards. So it's a pretty complicated picture. So what do we do to make that easier? How do we put security on the path of least resistance? That's really what we task ourselves with on a daily basis. How do we make all of this easier? And there's a number of things that we do. A lot of this is focused around developer experience. It's all about developer self-sufficiency, like I keep saying here, and providing that ultimate experience for the developers to be able to do all of this through our pipelines and our platforms. So my role on my team is really to bake as much of this into the process as we can, into the platform as we can, into the runtimes, into the pipelines. You know, if only I could do everything automated in that fashion, that would be awesome. But that's not where the story ends, obviously. Beyond that, we look at educating our developers, providing a diverse array of educational opportunities for based on the needs of our individual teams and developers, whether it's hackathons or immersive experiences with dojos and self-directed training. There's a lot of different ways that we approach that there. Documentation. Of course, documentation is hard. Good documentation is impossible, right? But that's still something. It doesn't mean we're not going to try, right? So we're always working on documenting our proven patterns so that people have something to follow, somewhere to get started. Cross-functional collaboration is critical. I think a lot of companies don't necessarily do this very well. This is a journey for us. We're always working on this, but it's a kind of a pipe dream to have a single two-pizza team that's got every skill that you need to deliver software, especially around security, right? We've been trying that for years, and we are always getting better, but at the same time, you need to open doors. You need to break down some of those walls between some of the organizational teams, and basically just collaborate on solving the problems together. And then we've got InnerSource. So that's really what I want to focus the rest of this time on. It's a developer conference after all, so let's talk about some of the things that we're doing with code beyond a lot of these other processes to try to scale some of these capabilities and make it easier to deliver an application that's secure by default.
So InnerSource, when I first heard this, I thought it was the most enterprisey term I'd ever heard. I honestly thought Liberty Mutual had coined it. Goes way back, more history than I give it credit for. Tim O'Reilly around 2000, I believe, yeah. We've built out 3 libraries. I hesitate to call them libraries. Everyone's built a library before, and they quickly turn into something you don't want to deal with. We need to upgrade our Spring Boot application, but we've got 20 libraries there that are not maintained, hard to do. With InnerSource, it's about bringing together the best of open source principles to a closed source world. So, everyone uses Spring here to some degree. If you could imagine, we're taking our opinionation of our identity providers and OAuth2 and then putting them into our internal library. Our latest one's targeting Spring Security 5. It's modularized, great support for auto configurations, being overrides, opt-in to everything. I don't want to make any assumptions about what flows people want in their applications. It's up to you to choose them. You know, take some responsibility yourself. Don't come to me saying, I just want everything out of the box. With security, you can't do that. InnerSource is extremely challenging, but it's more around the communications aspect of it. It's the hardest part of our jobs. Code's easy at the end of the day. Code does what you want it to. Trying to get developers on board to read documentation, share their ideas, and contribute back into your library so you can take the best of what's out there and share it out to everyone in your organization. Plus, not everyone likes your ideas. There's definitely people in this world who don't like Spring. Not sure who those people are. I love it. But they'll just have their own opinions and they won't want to use it. Can't solve it for everyone. So applying that InnerSource principle to secure code enablement, there's some really obvious call-outs that when you start thinking about it, open source and the term InnerSource, it should just be really obvious about what it helps to achieve. Within the libraries, I believe, last I looked, some rough metrics are around 1,200 applications using our libraries, and it continues to grow every single day. We're constantly getting emails, meeting requests, how do I implement this, what flows do I use, can you put this into the library? No, but you're welcome to provide a pull request. The goal is not to solve everything, but get it for the majority and give hooks and extensibility the same way Spring does for everyone. We want to provide that same sort of level of support to all our teams in our organization. In the older version libraries, we learned that solving for everyone just doesn't work. It comes too big, too bloated, and it puts people off nearly instantly. You get your secure by default with Spring Security and the class path, as we all know. But then we're learning our auto configurations, our configuration properties to make it incredibly easy to quickly and effectively secure what you need to secure. Spring Security can only do so much without knowing the inner workings and all the sins of the fathers we all have in the enterprise. This should be one of the most basic things with Spring Security, and people get it wrong every single day. Anyone want to hazard a guess what would happen with those two paths if you hit them with this configuration? They're both open. This is the difference between leaking someone's personal information who shouldn't have it and just allowing access to the APIs you want. Order matters. People get it wrong every single day. I've looked at so many applications, so many configurations, and they're like, oh, this should be secured, but it isn't. I'm like, oh, I bet you the path matchers are off.
Yeah, you can't really replace the need for the developer to just educate themselves and constantly retool and learn more about those underlying frameworks. But there's things like that we can make easier, whether it's through testing patterns or actual secure tests that we can provide through some of these libraries, or libraries that even give them an easier way to configure some of those auth matchers without making some of those common mistakes. Just one little example, as you get into Spring Security, like I said, it's really powerful, but it can also be complex for your everyday developer to understand. Not only that, but just to repeat it many times over, not just in a single app, but you've got a whole suite of microservices and functions and all of that, and trying to keep all of that up to date and avoiding some of the common pitfalls can be a little bit of a challenge. So, there's a whole host of things that we could look at here. I'm going to take you through a little bit of what we've built out and how we deal with some of these types of challenges here. So don't worry if you can't read that too well. We're going to kind of zoom in on little bits and pieces of this. But what we're looking at here is sort of, I guess, it's just a subset of what we're doing for authentication and authorization here. It's a flow that you might typically see within an application that needs to accept modern auth. It needs to accept tokens, OAuth tokens, bearer tokens, maybe handle some user authentication flows and that sort of stuff. Most apps don't need to do all of this. Some apps do need to combine multiple flows, right? So there's an aspect to this where, just determining the flow up front here is one of the challenges here. And then what happens after that could follow various paths in the process. Do you have to look, is it a JOT? Which provider did it come from? Is it an opaque token? How do we introspect that token? There's a lot of different things that kind of come out of this flow. So like I said, some of this is just Spring Security. Some of it's little decisions that we've embedded into our libraries. A lot of it, as much as possible, we want to extend some of those underlying components, latch onto those extension points provided by the Spring framework and build on from there. So I'm going to let Darren talk us through a little bit more of that.
I mean, you see most of the flows. This is the majority of what a lot of our developers need within Liberty Mutual, but how can you expect for a flow like this with all the enterprisey gotchas that we have in such a large organization? How can you expect them to know and implement this across thousands of applications, across hundreds of teams, thousands of developers? There's such a high margin of error. You know, we've seen path matchers, we get those wrong all the time. What if you leave out validations against your JOTs? We add more than the default into it. So user group extraction, everyone should be pretty familiar, you know, granting authorities based on LDAP or ID. Yeah, we have to make a few not normal decisions in places. We need a server, our resource servers, if they want users and some like cloud credentials JOTs coming through. We need to be able to support opaque tokens as well, just because that's the way it is. We don't have the power to fix that. So we've got those choices in there. But then you get into the actual getting the user info, and it varies depending, is it an internal or external user? The format of the identity store differs. We can get back singular JSON response, or we can get an array back. Environment disparity, LDAP sizes differ. Some are uppercase, some are lowercase. Role prefixing. It's wrong to assume that every single team within your organization should be able to do this and know all those gotchas. A lot of them we only found out at runtime after people started doing some more complex flows, started introducing more external users, et cetera, et cetera.
This is something that looks pretty simple on the surface. I mean, we've seen plenty of applications that only rely on a single IDP, a single identity store, maybe a single environment. It's not supposed to be complicated, right? But when you have multiple identity providers, different identity stores, the environment disparity that Darren mentioned, case sensitivity issues across environments, there's just a lot of really common mistakes that we tend to see. And so yeah, we can adapt to a lot of that just looking at the user's configuration. What identity provider are they using? We can say we're going to instantiate certain types of beans that handle, for instance, the user group extraction and converting that over to Spring Security just for a particular type of underlying identity store.
Yeah, I mean, we've got foregrounded authorities mappers that'll be used every day in people's applications that handle all the disparity between their environments, all the enterprise gotchas that exist. You know, if everything was completely 100% standards compliant, security would be pretty easy, but it's not. So currently we're supporting 2 IDP providers within Liberty, potential for more to come. So if we want to take the most basic thing, so we've got simple Spring Security 5 configuration, client registrations and providers, pretty basic stuff, and 1 custom configuration property. That's all that's needed at a basic level to enable our authorization code flows using our library. There's about 18 overall properties that you can introduce, more extensibility configuration if you'd like, but for a lot of people, this is all they need to do it. Yeah, so what about switching providers? We want to use a new cool provider. Again, simple. Different client IDs, secrets, endpoints, all Spring Security 5. You can Google this stuff. You know, we're not abstracting it away. You still need to understand Spring Security. We don't want to get into a world where our developers can't Google something and they're constantly coming to us for help. You know, it's not my day job to maintain the library. I guess it kind of is these days. But
nobody told you that.
But they need to be in a place that they can help themselves, and abstracting something like Spring Security away behind all your own configurations, classes, etc., does not help them.
You know, kind of tying this into the previous slide around user group extraction. Like this part, Spring makes it easy to switch providers, right? But it doesn't necessarily have full knowledge of how we're going to go out and get all of those user permissions. So maybe for one identity provider like Ping, maybe we're getting it from the OIDC user info endpoint. If we're using Azure AD, maybe we're reaching back out to the Graph API, and then depending on our configuration in Azure, maybe it's different versions of that API and different methods of extracting the user groups from that endpoint.
Obviously, we've got different beans across the board, depending on what IDP provider, what gotchas each of those IDP providers have, and they all have them. It's just a fact of life. So We know we need to support multi-tenancy. See Josh Cummins is in the audience. There's a late addition to this presentation based off his talk yesterday. Fully recommend you watch it because we need to support 2 IDP providers in the one application. So this is what we're going to do. This is Josh's code. It's on his GitHub account. Very good presentation. Recommend you check it out. But Josh helpfully showed how we can get some multi-tenancy implemented in one form. But would this be acceptable or responsible on us to let teams just implement this across the board? It's really not. I wouldn't have even knew to implement it this way. I would have went a different route. But when someone from Spring Security puts it up, I think that's okay to do then. But there's such a great margin of error with this. You know, you may miss a bean, endpoint, something, just a tiny detail you think doesn't matter, but does. Margin of error is too great, so obviously we're going to put something like this in the next release of our library to give that multi-tenancy support, all abstracted away just behind a few configuration properties beans, but it'll still allow them to override, disable, whatever they want to do when it comes to multi-tenancy. Yes, so opaque tokens and JOTs. In a normal world, you don't have issues, you have one or the other. But we're not in a normal world. Our applications can receive both opaque tokens and JOTs at runtime. It shouldn't be a runtime decision to pick between them normally. Normally you expect one or the other. It's very easy to set up. But we get a token in, we need to see if it is an opaque token, is it a JOT? More complexity added into people's applications that is not provided out of the box by Spring Security. You know, at the minute, if you try to load up opaque token on a resource server or JOT support on a resource server, you will get an exception. I was working on the opaque support, which is in Spring Security 5.2. Great, thought it was all there. Loaded up an application that had both opaque token and JOT support, and it blew up, and I was very sad for a couple of days.
And I think what Darren's touching on here really ties into stuff that we haven't looked at around combining multiple patterns and doing more identity propagation. So it might not be clear why you would need to support both until we get into some of the identity propagation patterns. UI calls your backend, which calls another microservice and so on. And we've got exposure across teams, across parts of the organization with different consumers that are on different versions of whatever, whether it's IDP, same IDP or different IDPs. Maybe one's passing a JOT, the other one's still using opaque tokens. So you get into some interesting scenarios there where you want to receive a token that identifies the end user, that maintains that verifiable user identity through the whole journey, as opposed to switching just to like client credentials, expecting all of your consumers to use client credentials all the way through. So
we've talked about just how we provided beans, auto configuration, all the good stuff Spring Boot can give you out of the box, but what about if you wanted to do something programmatically within your application? What if you want to add a new flow within your application, or you want to add new entry points, etc.? You need to do that programmatically. It's not something you can just do through configuration properties. So layered in a really simple interface abstraction. It just sits on top of the server HTTP security or the servlet-based one as well, with some custom methods on it that we can use to order, group them by the IDP providers, know what they're trying to target. This is completely optional as well. Our entire library is modularized.
So what are you showing here exactly? Is this a...
So this is just if you wanted to enable HTTP basic. You didn't want OAuth, but we want you to use our library. And if you're using a particular part of it, this is how you would implement that part of the configuration. It's just a simple abstraction on top of the Spring Security, but you don't need to use it. It's completely modularized. If you want to just do it completely Spring and just use our beans, you can add that module in. Part of it. So we just collect the adapters and start applying them to the server HTTP or the web security configure adapter. So we only have one of those in the application. Again, this is a higher level of abstraction. You can't have multiple web filter proxy chains, but we find out a lot of people get caught out. So if you're in this module, you get one. And of course, everyone loves reactive these days. So library fully supports servlet and reactive. Doesn't matter what your application is. The beans will load up based on what container it's in. If it's in Natty, you're getting reactive beans. If it's in Tomcat, whatever, you're going to get your servlet beans. users don't have to change a thing depending on their runtime. So bottom line, really, with this, talking about what we're putting in, how we're doing it, I took a fairly simple application and implemented these flows, and I like to think I know how to use Spring Security, and I came out at about 737 lines of code, 19 externalized properties. Quite a lot for one application. Remember, we're talking thousands of developers across thousands of applications, all of which, to a good degree, have some sort of HTTP calls in there.
And that wasn't even this entire picture. I think we didn't
wasn't.
get around to highlighting what exactly that applies to, but it was just...
Yeah, it was client credentials and auth code. I accounted for the user mappings, and that was about it. Versus with our library, it just drops automatically. The lines of code left, 90 odd, was custom entry points for a single page web app. Really, really good win. Does all the same stuff. There's no differences to the actual running of it. It's just abstracted, opinionation, the same sort of stuff Spring gives you.
I think we're getting a little bit tight on time here, so let's kind of start wrapping this up here. This is something we're not really going to get into. I wanted to talk about it a little bit, just touch on it, but there's another talk on a lot of this stuff tomorrow. I've got a note on there. It's back in this room at 12:30 tomorrow. That's talking a lot more about using gateways and some stateless microservice authorization patterns. It's just an example of some of the complexity we see. That's not just what you got to get beyond that individual app to realize, some of these things that we need to solve at a broader scale, not just once, but across thousands of applications. And when you get into some of these different patterns with gateways and functions and, trying to do all the appropriate identity propagation throughout that, it gets pretty complicated. So let's just move past that and start talking about lessons learned here, though. We've talked a little bit about adopting Spring Security throughout this, and just the whole open source model, right, is all about transparency. You don't secure code by locking it away in a box so nobody can see it, right? That's kind of an old school mentality. So get it out there, get people using it, beating up on it, and proving whether it works or doesn't work, and take a lot of those best of breed ideas back into the libraries that we can all benefit from. So one person fixes it, other people can just upgrade and take advantage of that, right?
Yeah. Do not embrace Spring Security, don't abstract it away. It can be very complicated. We rolled our own code for some flows, and it is just not worth the pain. The stuff you get out of the box with Spring Security is awesome, and it continues to be awesome. Spring Security 5 is jarring to learn, but it is worth it at the end of the day. Our goal is not to abstract away Spring Security.
With 4, we complained about what was missing. With 5, we complained about how complex it is, but we asked for it, right? We want all those features, but now there's a lot to learn.
Yeah, empower the developers. If it's not easy for them to use, if it's not modularized, if it's not easy, documented, etc., people will work around security. They will not sit and wait for security. They will go to the ends of the earth to work around you, whatever guardrails, rules you've put in place. At the end of the day, developers are in control of the runtime of the application. If it's not easy, you're going to have so much insecure code out there. Yeah, configuration extensibility, we built really fat. Let's do it all types of libraries before. It just doesn't work. You spend more and more time supporting, testing, can't get rid of it. Same issues with any sort of library.
Talked a little bit about documentation earlier. It is hard to do, but we continue to aspire to be better at this, right? But people will go blind, doing everything else, looking at Stack Overflow, asking friends, calling their mom, whatever, before they get to reading the actual documentation. Same thing happens with Spring. There's a lot of great documentation out there, some of the best, right? But people are still just looking for answers on Stack Overflow, code samples, and whatnot, just finding the current version of the truth as of this exact point in time, right? So instead of documentation, we lean a lot more towards working code, examples, reference applications, something that I can download and use as an example to get up and running. So that's where we find the most success is, people just show me the code, really. And beyond that, collaboration, of course, I can't say that enough, right? Just talk, don't remove the human touch. If nothing else, work together, be humble, always be a beginner, always learn from each other and work together on solving the problems, because this is some pretty hard stuff to figure out. So there's a ton more of things that we've learned throughout the process that we can't get into. Darren, I'm going to leave him with this one thought. I think you came across this little bit of wisdom.
Yeah, words of wisdom from Taylor Swift. can't say it any more basic. It doesn't matter that we're talking about Spring Security, OAuth, whatever. Security in general needs to be usable and secure. Otherwise, it will be usable and insecure. It's just the way it is. If you do start going down InnerSourcing routes of building libraries and stuff, read the documentation, Spring Auto configurations, read Spring Security, do it right from the go. Otherwise, people will just not use it and start running their own code, and then you'll be into dependency hell in places, or you won't be able to find what vulnerabilities are within applications. You know, I've released libraries with bugs in it without getting people InnerSourced using the same artifacts. It's hard to fix those at scale.
That's all we got for today. We're at time. We can try to take some questions, maybe, or do we need to wrap up and maybe take it to the halls?
Yeah, wrap it.
Okay. All right. We'll stick around if anybody has any questions. Thanks for coming.